So the Aloha Spirit lives on. Let's go ahead and talk about it. What's up, Wolverines? Welcome back to the channel. My name is John Crump, and I happen to be a writer, and I'm nominated for a Gundy for Top 2A Writer, and I would appreciate your vote. So head over to thegundys.com and vote for me for Top 2A Writer, or just follow the link in the description. And while you're at it, like, comment, and subscribe. Today, we are going to be talking about Wilson versus Hawaii, which was a case that went up to the Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari. Unfortunately, the justices of the Supreme Court denied the writ of cert, but two justices said they would have granted it. Those justices was Thomas and Alito. We'll get into what they had to say, but first let's go ahead and talk about this case. Wilson was suing Hawaii over their unconstitutional permitting scheme, but the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled that they are allowed to do whatever they want in regards to the Second Amendment because of the Aloha Spirit. Yes, the Aloha Spirit has never been used in any case in history, but for some reason, the Supreme Court of Hawaii found that it had some special right because of some imaginary spirit. The Supreme Court denied the cert because of interlocutory posture. That basically means that the writ of cert was filed before all claims were resolved, which means that the Supreme Court had a way of not taking this case. Usually the courts shy away from cases that have outstanding issues that have not been resolved, and this is no different. But Alito and Thomas did say that they would take the case, and I'm going to read a couple things to you that they said. Wilson persuaded the circuit court to dismiss his unlicensed carry charges. The Hawaii Supreme Court disagreed. It spent the bulk of its opinion explaining why the Hawaii Constitution does not confer an individual right to bear arms, with analysis that doubles as a critique of this court's Second Amendment jurisprudence. Bemoaning the policy consequences, the court asserts that an originalist interpretation of the Second Amendment disables the state's responsibility to protect public safety, reduce gun violence, and safeguard peaceful public movement by pitting firearms restrictions mostly out of bounds. And it denigrated the need for public carry in particular, rejecting as un-Hawaiian a federally mandated lifestyle that lets citizens walk around with deadly weapons. On the Hawaii Supreme Court's view, a sounder approach to constitutional interpretation would give due regard to the spirit of aloha and would preclude any individual right to bear arms, or at least subject to levels of scrutiny and public safety balancing test. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Basically, what they are saying is that the Hawaii Supreme Court went ahead and took a shot at the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court had the Bruin decision, and Hawaii really didn't like that. Hawaii wants to go back to an interest balancing test, which Bruin forbids, but yet the Supreme Court denied cert here. Let's go ahead and continue. The decision below is the latest example of a lower court failing to afford the Second Amendment the respect due an enumerated constitutional right. As this court has repeatedly emphasized, the constitutional right to bear arms in public for self-defense is not a second-class right subject to an entirely different body of rules than the other Bill of Rights guarantees. So the Hawaii Supreme Court cannot single out the Second Amendment for disfavor, even if it does not believe that right is really worth insisting upon. What Thomas is doing here is calling out the Hawaii Supreme Court for disregarding Bruin and the Supreme Court rulings. He says that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right, and this is exactly how Hawaii is treating the Second Amendment. They are trying to put new restrictions on an enumerated right that applies to no other amendment besides the Second Amendment. And according to Bruin, they cannot do that. This is not the Hawaii Supreme Court misinterpreting a ruling of the Supreme Court or deciding that the Supreme Court said one thing when it actually said another. This is Hawaii pushing back against the Supreme Court, saying, I don't care what you have to say. This is the way we are going to rule. The Hawaii Supreme Court is a state level court. The Supreme Court is the superior court of all other courts in the country. The Hawaii Supreme Court is bound by what the United States Supreme Court says, even though they do not want to be. And Thomas is calling them out for this. So let's go ahead and read a little bit more. Had the Hawaii Supreme Court followed its duty to consider the merits of Wilson's defense, the licensing scheme's unconstitutionality should have been apparent. We made it clear that the Second Amendment is a right guaranteed to all Americans whose exercise cannot be conditioned on a showing of special need. Yet, in restricting license eligibility to Hawaiians with exceptional cases or who otherwise could show special urgency or need, the Hawaii regime's obvious unconstitutionality may be why the Hawaii legislature has since amended the state's licensing statute to create a shall issue regime, at least for concealed carry. Had the Hawaii Supreme Court followed the legislature's lead and tried to give effect to our Second Amendment jurisprudence, it would have found the licensing scheme at issue unconstitutional and upheld the dismissal of Wilson's public carry charges. This court cannot tolerate such blatant defiance in any constitutional context. Okay, guys, so that is what Thomas said, and I 100% agree with it. Alito joined him in that. Gorsuch also said some stuff, but he also said that licensing schemes are legal, but Hawaii's probably isn't legal, but let Gorsuch do what Gorsuch does. This does not mean this is the end of the case. It just means that the case came up to the Supreme Court a little too early. It's interlocutory. So that means it has to run its course at the lower courts before the Supreme Court will consider taking it. Now, if the circuit court doesn't agree and it gets back up to the Supreme Court, then I think that they will take it because the Hawaii Supreme Court thumbed its nose at the Supreme Court and disregarded Bruin. There's no legal standard in this world that gave them the ability to do what they did, yet they took it. It's almost like the Hawaii Supreme Court was acting as a foreign government. Maybe they are separatist, I don't know. But I do believe that this might go back up to the Supreme Court, and if it does, I believe that Wilson will win. All right, guys, that's it. Just wanted to make a little video to let you know what's going on with this because the Spirit of Aloha case is definitely interesting. So I will see you guys later. So stay ever vigilant, stay ever free, keep in the fight. I am out of here. Wolverines MFers.